The council chamber smelled of beeswax candles and old parchment, and Myca's heart hammered like a war drum as she slipped through the side door before the others arrived. He was already there, seated on the carved throne chair reserved for council sessions, head bent over a scroll, dark hair falling across his brow exactly the way it always did when he was concentrating. Her chest warmed just looking at him. Weeks of watching him pour himself into a kingdom that wasn't even fully his to fix. Weeks of him listening to her, truly listening, in a way no one ever had. She crossed the room quietly, a smile already curving her lips. No council members for another few minutes. Just the two of them, and all the things she'd never said out loud. "Byron," she whispered, reaching for his face. He looked up, startled, and for one fractured second, something in his eyes was wrong. Too sharp, too unfamiliar. But she was already leaning in, already closing the distance, her hand cupping his jaw the way she'd imagined 100 times since the lower pack, since the cottages, since the night he told her she'd made him better. Her lips were a breath from his when he jerked back so violently the chair scraped against stone. "What?" His voice cracked with shock. "What do you think you're doing?" Myca froze, hand still raised in the air between them. That voice, same timbre, same low register she knew so well, but the words came out wrong, clipped, affronted, cold in a way Tyron had never once been with her. "Byron?" Her own voice came out smaller than she wanted. He stared at her like she'd grown a second head, drawing his collar straight with sharp, irritated movements. "Who exactly are you?" The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. This man wore Tyron's face, Tyron's broad shoulders, Tyron's dark eyes, Tyron's exact, unmistakable mouth. But the man, looking back at her, was a stranger wearing her king's skin. Before she could find words, the chamber doors swung open and council members began filing in, voices rising in their usual morning chatter. Myca took one stumbling step backward, her pulse roaring in her ears, watching the not Tyron straighten his spine and arrange his features into something unreadable, something performative. Something was very, very wrong, and she had almost kissed it. 3 months earlier, Myca had not yet learned to fear her own intuition. She was the daughter of Halvard, a name that still made elders bow their heads in the lower pack and made nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. Her father had spent his life standing in front of injustice with his chest bared, daring it to strike him down. It eventually had. He died with a petition still clutched in his hand, struck down by men who served a king too cowardly to face him directly. The official record called it an accident. Everyone who mattered knew better. Myca had buried her grief the only way her family knew how, by picking up the fight exactly where he'd dropped it. "You look like him when you scowl like that," her aunt told her once, watching Myca pace the small cottage they shared at the edge of the lower pack. Halvard used to wear that same face before he'd storm off to write another letter no one would read. "Someone has to," Myca had said. "Someone has to keep saying it until they're forced to listen." She wrote petition after petition, detailed accounts of crumbling cottages, of wells gone dry while the upper pack's fountains ran clean, of children going hungry while the Alpha King's table groaned under feasts. She sent them through every official channel that existed. Not one reply ever came. So she went to the castle herself. "The Alpha King is occupied," the gate guard told her the first time, not quite meeting her eyes. "The Alpha King is occupied," he told her the second time, the third, the 11th. "Use the official channels," he said once, almost apologetic, as if he knew exactly how absurd the suggestion was when those channels led nowhere at all. Myca began to understand something the rest of the lower pack already knew in their bones, that under Alpha King Byron, they did not exist. Not in any way that mattered. Not in any way that earned them his attention. What the lower pack did not know, what almost no one beyond the castle walls knew, was that Byron had never wanted the crown in the first place. He had been born minutes before his twin brother Tyron, and that handful of minutes had decided the shape of both their lives. Their father, the old Alpha King, had wanted differently. He'd watched his sons grow side by side, Byron loud, magnetic, impossible to ignore in any room, Tyron quiet, thoughtful, the one who noticed things no one else did. The old king had pulled Tyron aside more than once in his final years. "You have the mind for this," he'd told him. "Byron has the charm. You have the wisdom. A kingdom needs wisdom far more than it needs charm." But Tyron, even then, shrank from the weight of it. He'd watched the way the court looked at Byron adoring, easy, instant, and he'd known, with the bone-deep certainty of a younger brother who'd spent a lifetime standing one step behind, that he wasn't built for that kind of love. So when their father died and the crown came due, Tyron stepped back, and Byron stepped forward, and the matter was considered settled. It was, in nearly every way that counted, the wrong decision. Byron ruled the way he'd lived his entire life carelessly, joyfully, with no real interest in consequence. He sat through council sessions with his chin propped on his fist, eyes glazing over petitions and reports, until he could politely excuse himself to whatever tavern or hunting party or noblewoman's chamber awaited him that evening. He'd stumble back to the castle at dawn, half drunk and grinning, and make his way to Tyron's room to recount the night's adventures in vivid, unrepentant detail. "You should have seen her face, Ty," he said one such night, sprawled across his brother's bed while Tyron sat at his desk, still awake, still working through a stack of unread reports Byron had abandoned. "Absolutely furious, I left before sunrise. I told her a king's time isn't his own." He laughed at his own joke. Tyron didn't look up from the parchment. "You weren't even at council yesterday." "Council is unbearable," Byron groaned, flinging an arm over his eyes. "All those old men droning about grain taxes and border disputes. I'd rather take a blade to the chest. People are struggling, Byron. The lower pack hasn't seen real investment in years. There's a woman who sent in petition after petition. And that's exactly why I have you." Byron sat up, grinning, and reached over to pat his brother's shoulder with affection that was entirely real, even if it cost him nothing. "You worry about the things I can't be bothered to worry about. That's our arrangement, isn't it? You hate crowds, I hate paperwork. We balance each other out." "That's not an arrangement," Tyron said quietly. "That's you doing nothing. Don't be dramatic." Byron flopped back down. "Remember, Father wanted you on the throne in the first place. I only took it because you didn't want it. So really, I'm just borrowing it. You're the one who's actually fit to rule. Help me where I keep failing, and together we'll manage just fine. The people are our people, brother. We'll look after them together." Tyron wanted to argue. He always wanted to argue. But Byron was looking at him with that easy, open affection he'd worn since they were boys, and Tyron had never once been able to stay angry at the only person in the world who'd never made him feel small for being quiet. So he said nothing, and he kept working, and the pile of unread petitions grew taller on Byron's desk while Tyron quietly, invisibly, began doing the actual work of governing a kingdom that believed someone else was governing it. The council, in time, stopped questioning why the king suddenly seemed more attentive on some days than others. They simply assumed exhaustion, or moods, or the unpredictable nature of power. No one dared suggest the truth that two faces wore one crown, and only one of them had bothered to learn what the crown actually weighed. It was during one such session, sifting through the towering stack of ignored correspondence, that Tyron found her name for the first time. Myca, daughter of Halvard. He recognized the surname instantly, everyone did. He read through her petition once, then twice, struck by the precision of her language, the controlled fury beneath every carefully chosen word. She didn't beg, she demanded. The way someone demands a debt be repaid, not a favor granted. He requested an audience with her that same week. She arrived at the castle expecting nothing, the way she'd expected nothing a dozen times before. But this time the guard didn't turn her away. This time she was led through the halls she'd only ever seen from the wrong side of the gate, into the council chamber, where a man sat waiting who looked, in every visible way, exactly like the king who had ignored her for 3 years. She didn't bow. "Under your father's rule, the lower pack had clean water and standing roofs," she said, before he could even greet her. "Since you took the crown, we've had neither. Do you know how many winters my people have survived without proper shelter, Your Majesty? Or is that beneath your notice the way everything else about us apparently is?" Tyron, wearing his brother's name without correcting her, felt something close to delight flicker through him, entirely against his better judgment. He found himself picturing Byron in this exact seat, on the receiving end of this exact fury, and the image was so absurd, so satisfying, that a laugh nearly escaped him. It did escape him, just slightly, just enough. Myca's eyes narrowed to flint. "You find this amusing?" "No, forgive me," he said quickly, straightening. "I wasn't mocking your complaint. I find your boldness intriguing. Genuinely. Most people who stand before this throne flatter at first and speak the truth never." "I don't care for titles," she said flatly. "I respect leaders who do their duty. So far, you've given me no reason to respect you at all." "That's fair," he admitted, and meant it. He told her then that he'd read every petition she'd ever sent. Every single one, in order. The frustration in her handwriting growing sharper with each unanswered letter. "You never stopped writing," he said, "even when nothing came back. That's not nothing. That says something about you." "It says I don't quit," she said, unmoved. "It doesn't say you've done anything about it." He felt, oddly, like the one being judged before a throne rather than the one sitting on it. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't used to anyone looking at him at this face, at Byron's face, and refusing to be charmed by it. "I'll do something," he told her finally. "I promise you that. Your petition is noted. Truly." She left unconvinced, but something about the exchange stayed lodged in his chest the rest of the night. He didn't sleep. He sat at his desk and wrote, by candlelight, every grievance from every scattered petition into one clear, organized account: water lines, collapsed roofs, missing grain shipments, the names of families who'd lost children to a fever that proper shelter might have prevented. He simplified it. He made it impossible to misunderstand or ignore. In the morning, he placed it in his brother's hands. "This is good work, Ty," Byron said, flipping through the pages with something almost like sincerity. "Truly, I'll look into it. I promise." Weeks passed. Byron went hunting in the eastern hills. He attended 3 different feasts in 2 different territories. He courted a baron's daughter, then a merchant's widow, then forgot both their names within the same fortnight. Somewhere along the way, the list Tyron had spent a sleepless night composing slipped beneath a pile of forgotten correspondence, and Byron, true to the entirety of his nature, never thought of it again. More petitions arrived, Myca's name among them, each letter shorter than the last, each one carrying less hope and more contempt. It was the contempt that finally broke something in Tyron. He found Byron in his chambers near midnight, half drunk, recounting some tale about a tavern brawl he'd started for sport. And for the first time in either of their lives, Tyron didn't let him finish. "Stop." The word came out sharp enough that Byron actually blinked, startled into silence. "Just stop, for once. Ty, I sat in that council chamber for you. I read every single report, every petition, every complaint, while you were off getting drunk and betting strangers and forgetting the one thing I asked you to actually care about." Tyron's voice rose, cracking with 3 years of swallowed frustration. "A woman has watched her people suffer for years because of you, and I handed you the answer, written out so simply a child could follow it, and you lost it. You make me look like a fool, Byron. I do the work and you wear the credit, and somehow I'm still the one apologizing for what you don't do." Byron stared at him. He had never, not once, in 26 years, seen his brother raise his voice. Byron set down his cup. suddenly sober in a way wine had nothing to do with. I didn't realize. Ty, I'm sorry. I mean it. I'll do better. Tyron said nothing. He simply turned and walked out, leaving his brother sitting alone in the candlelight, the laughter gone entirely from his face. For the first time in his life, Byron looked, for one unguarded moment, genuinely afraid of what he'd become. Byron tried. That was the strange, unfamiliar part of it. He actually tried. The week after Tyron's outburst, he dragged himself to every council session, sat through droning reports on grain reserves and border skirmishes, and did not once excuse himself before the final gavel fell. He looked, by the third day, thoroughly miserable about it. By the fifth, he'd fallen asleep twice mid-session, his head lolling sideways while a minister droned on about irrigation rights. The nobles noticed. Of course they noticed. His Majesty seems different this week. One whispered to another in the corridor, not quite able to keep the confusion from her voice. Attentive one day, vacant the next. Do you suppose? Don't, the other cut in sharply, eyes darting toward the guards. Don't even finish that thought. Accusing a king of impersonation is the fastest way to lose your tongue. So the whispers stayed whispers, swallowed before they could become anything more dangerous, and the court settled on the comfortable fiction that their king simply had moods. By the end of the third week, Byron had reached his limit. He found Tyron in the study, surrounded by the same stacks of parchment that had occupied him for months, and dropped into the chair across from him with the weary collapse of a man who'd run a great distance. I can't do this, he said. I mean it, Ty. I sat through 4 hours today discussing a dispute over fence posts. Fence posts. I think something in me actually died. Tyron didn't look up. Welcome to ruling. I'm serious. I watched you do this for weeks, and I thought, how hard can it be? Turns out the answer is extremely hard, and also unbearably dull. Byron leaned forward, something more sincere creeping into his voice. But you, these past few weeks I covered, badly, mind you, even I could see what needed fixing. The roads, the grain stores, that woman's petition, the one I lost like an idiot. You see all of it without even trying. I don't have that. I never will. What are you asking me, Byron? I want you to rule, properly. Not just covering for me while I disappear, actually be the one they answer to. Byron held his gaze, and for once there was no performance in it. I know what I'm asking. I know it's not fair to ask you to keep wearing my face, but you're better at this than I will ever be, and the kingdom deserves better than what I've given it. Tyron set down his pen slowly. I can't be you, Byron. Not permanently. Not like this. You won't have to forever. I swear it when the time is right. I'll stand up and tell everyone the truth. I'll announce it myself. Until then, Byron reached across the desk and gripped his brother's wrist, the old, familiar warmth returning to his face. We're brothers for life. We've always had each other's backs. Let me lean on you the way you've always leaned on me, just this once, properly. Tyron searched his brother's face for the careless boy who'd never once thought before speaking, and found instead something that looked, however briefly, like real regret. He smiled despite himself, and pulled Byron into a hug. The kingdom, without ever knowing it, now belonged entirely to the quiet twin. Tyron requested Myca's presence again within the week. She arrived expecting the same vague, hollow promises she'd received from every official channel for 3 years, a king performing concern without ever intending to act on it. I'd like to see it myself, Tyron told her instead. The lower pack. Take me there. Myca studied him with open suspicion. You want a tour, Your Majesty? Something to ease your conscience before you forget about us again? I want to see what I've allowed to happen, he said simply. And I'd like you to be the one who shows me, she agreed, certain it was theater, certain he'd glance around for an hour, murmur something sympathetic, and vanish back behind his castle walls the way every official before him had. She was wrong. The moment they crossed into the lower pack, Tyron went silent. Cottages with roofs caved in from years of neglect. A well gone dry, its stones cracked and crumbling. Children running barefoot through mud because no one had thought to repair the paths. He didn't simply look. He knelt beside a collapsed wall and began lifting debris with his own hands, ignoring the protests of the guards who trailed behind him. "Your Majesty, that's not—" "I have hands," Tyron said, not looking up. "They work fine." Myca stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching the Alpha King's tunic gather dust and grime, watching him speak gently to an elderly woman who'd lost her roof the previous winter, watching him listen, actually listen to every complaint without once glancing toward the exit. By the time he gathered the lower pack together that evening, something in her had already begun to shift, though she fought it with everything she had. "I owe you an apology," Tyron told the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clear and steady across the square. "Not excuses, an apology. You have been failed, repeatedly, by the very crown meant to protect you. That ends now. New cottages will be built. The well will be restored within the month. I will see to it myself, and I will return to confirm it's been done." The crowd murmured, disbelieving, hopeful despite themselves. Tyron turned to Myca last. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for refusing to let me forget you. Most people would have given up by now." "My family doesn't give up," she said, but the hostility in her voice had thinned to something else entirely. "I'm glad you finally listened," she added, softer than she meant to. That night, alone in his chambers, Tyron felt something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet, settled pride that had nothing to do with his brother's approval. He thought of Myca, of the sharp intelligence behind every word she spoke, the fire that never once dimmed even after years of being ignored. Curious, he pulled the castle records and read through her family's history, generation after generation of Halvards who'd stood against injustice, who'd been imprisoned, exiled, and finally killed for refusing to stay silent. He sat back, frowning. A legacy like that, and she wasn't anywhere near the king's council. It made no sense. It made him look, for the first time, at who actually sat on that council. And what he found unsettled him. His so-called beta, a noble's son installed more for his father's influence than any understanding of the role, who'd barely glanced at a single petition in years. At the next council session, hands trembling slightly beneath the table, Tyron made his decision. "Effective today," he announced. "The position of beta will be filled by Myca, daughter of Halvard." The noble's son went white. His father shot to his feet. "Your Majesty, this is he has served faithfully. He has served comfortably," Tyron said, steady despite the unfamiliar fear coiling in his chest. "There's a difference. We owe the people accountability, not inheritance. That ends today." The chamber erupted in protest, but Tyron held his ground until it died down, and by the session's end, Myca stood at his side wearing the title that should have belonged to her family generations ago. "I appreciate this," she told him afterward, arms crossed, unwilling to soften completely. "But understand, I won't compromise to make you comfortable. Not now, not ever. I wouldn't want you to," he said. "I read about your family's legacy, Myca. Asking you to compromise would be an insult to everything they built. The position is yours because you've earned it, nothing more." Something in her expression cracked, just slightly. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom began, slowly, to heal. Myca brought him problems no noble ever thought to mention: a fever spreading through a village too poor to afford a healer, a bridge collapse that had cut off an entire settlement from trade. Tyron acted on every one of them, and together they rebuilt, piece by piece, what years of neglect had broken. Somewhere in the long nights spent poring over reports, something else began to grow between them, quiet, unhurried, neither of them quite willing to name it. Tyron found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, struck by the way her whole face changed when she spoke about the people she fought for. For the first time in his life, someone looked at him truly him, not his brother's reputation, not the shadow he'd spent a lifetime standing in, and saw someone worth listening to. And Myca, for the first time, felt heard. Not tolerated, not humored. Heard. "I never expected this," she admitted one evening, the two of them alone in the study long after the rest of the castle had gone quiet. "A king who actually gets his hands dirty. I spent years assuming you were all the same. Maybe I needed the right push," Tyron said, "to start taking my duty seriously." The space between them had narrowed without either of them noticing, his hand resting near hers on the desk, her gaze lifting to meet his. For a moment neither moved. Then he leaned in, and so did she. And for one suspended heartbeat, it seemed inevitable. Myca pulled back first. "We shouldn't," she said, breath unsteady. "Business and pleasure, they don't mix." "No," Tyron agreed, though the hunger lingered between them long after she'd stepped away. "They don't." The kingdom prospered. Roads were repaired, grain stores replenished, the lower pack rebuilt cottage by cottage until it no longer resembled the ruin it had been. And everywhere people spoke the same name with growing reverence: Byron, the Alpha King who had finally become what his father always wanted. "I'm sure your father would be proud of you," Myca told him one evening, watching him review the final reports on the lower pack's reconstruction. Tyron went still. His father's voice echoed faintly in his memory. "You have the mind for this," words he'd spent years believing were spoken to the wrong son. "He was the only one who ever believed I could do this," Tyron said quietly. "Until you. You're a great king, Byron. I became a better one with you beside me." This time, neither of them pulled back. The kiss was slow at first, careful, as though either of them might still change their mind. Then it deepened. 3 years of longing and 3 months of quiet devotion pouring into it all at once. And for the first time since he'd taken his brother's place, Tyron forgot entirely that he was wearing someone else's name. Byron heard the praises long before he saw the results himself, his name on the lips of merchants, farmers, nobles alike, spoken with a warmth he'd never once earned. He found Tyron in the corridor and pulled him into a crushing hug. "I knew you had it in you," he said, grinning. "Listen to them, Ty. They love me. Well, they love you, but they think it's me, which is close enough, isn't it?" Tyron managed a tight smile and said nothing. Byron, drunk on attention he hadn't earned, made his decision the very next morning. "I want to sit in council today," he announced. "Just to feel it, the weight of it. My name carrying that far, I want to know what that feels like for myself." Tyron's stomach dropped. "Byron, I don't think," but his brother was already halfway down the corridor, practically glowing with anticipation, and Tyron, watching the closest thing he had to genuine excitement light up Byron's face, couldn't bring himself to take it from him. He didn't object. It was, within the hour, the worst mistake either of them had ever made. Myca arrived early, as she always did, eager for a few private moments before the council filed in. She crossed the chamber with a smile already forming, reaching for his face the way she had 100 times in her mind since the kiss they'd finally allowed themselves. "Byron," she whispered. The man in the chair looked up, startled, his eyes all wrong, his voice sharp with confusion as he jerked backward from her touch. "What do you think you're doing?" And Myca, hands still raised in the empty air between them, felt the floor of her entire world tilt sideways, the realization crashing over her with sickening clarity. This was not the man she loved. Myca didn't sleep that night. She lay rigid in her bed, replaying the moment over and over, the stranger's eyes in her king's face, the sharp recoil, the confusion that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with not knowing her at all. She'd left the council chamber the moment the session ended, slipping out before anyone could stop her, her mind spinning through every interaction she'd had with him in the past months. Something had been wrong from the very first moment. She'd felt it and dismissed it, the strange formality in his posture that morning, the way his eyes had swept over her like she was a stranger rather than the woman he'd kissed 3 nights before. He'd spoken of his achievement with a self-satisfaction that curdled in her stomach, praising himself in a way Tyron never once had, not even when the lower pack had wept with gratitude at his feet. Tyron never bragged. He deflected credit, gave it to her, to the people, to anyone but himself. This man had preened. She'd excused herself before she said something she couldn't take back. Byron, for his part, left the council chamber thoroughly pleased with himself. He found Tyron in his chambers that evening, practically bursting with the kind of energy he usually reserved for recounting his conquests. "You'll never believe it," he said, dropping into a chair uninvited. "That beta of yours, Myca, was it? Tried to kiss me before the session started. Walked right up and reached for my face like it was the most natural thing in the world." Tyron's blood went cold. "She did what?" "I know." Byron grinned, oblivious. "Didn't realize you had that kind of effect on people, brother. All this time I thought I was the one with the reputation. Looks like you've been holding out on me." "Byron," Tyron's voice came out tight, strained in a way that should have warned him. "She's not just anyone." He stopped, then forced the words out anyway, because they needed saying. "I love her." Byron blinked, the grin faltering slightly, though it didn't fully disappear. "Well, that explains the blushing. Look, if you want my advice on how to handle a woman like that—" "I don't want your advice." Tyron's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I want you to understand what you've done. You confused her. You frightened her. I'll fix it," Byron said, waving a hand, still not quite grasping the weight of what he'd stumbled into. "I won't say anything. Your secret's safe, Ty. I promise." He left before Tyron could say anything else, and the promise, as Byron's promises so often were, was made with good intentions and very little actual thought behind it. The days that followed unraveled everything Tyron had spent months building. Byron, delighted with the attention his name commanded, returned to council again and again, not out of duty, but out of vanity, eager to bask in praise he hadn't earned. He overturned decisions Tyron had carefully negotiated. He dismissed petitions with the same careless indifference he'd shown for years before Tyron had ever taken his place. The council, bewildered by the king's erratic shifts between diligence and apathy, began to whisper again, louder this time. "It's the old sickness," one elder murmured. "It returned once before, didn't it, when he was young? Affects the mind, they say." Myca didn't believe a word of it. She confronted him directly after one particularly disastrous session, cornering him in the corridor before he could slip away. "What's going on with you?" she demanded. Byron, caught off guard, tried his usual charm. "Long week. Affairs of state weigh on a man. You understand." "Don't." Her voice cut through his deflection like a blade. "I know you. I've spent months learning every shift in your moods, every way you think, every word you choose. Whatever this is, whoever you are right now, you are not the Byron I know." The use of his name hung in the air between them, and for one terrible second, Byron's composure slipped entirely. He said nothing, which was answer enough, and Myca walked away with her suspicions burning hotter than ever, though she still lacked the final piece that would make sense of everything. Tyron found his breaking point that same night. Byron wandered into his chambers as he always did, ready to recount the day's events with his usual easy detachment, utterly blind to the wreckage he'd left behind him. "You should have seen their faces today," he started. "I told them—" "Stop!" Tyron's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight Byron had never heard from him before, not even the night he'd first lost his temper, weeks ago. "Just stop talking," Byron frowned. "Ty, you don't understand what you're doing." Tyron rose from his chair, and for once, he didn't look away from his brother's face. "You're not just sitting in on council to feel important. You're undoing everything. Every relationship I built, every trust I earned, every single fix I fought for gone, because you wanted to feel what it was like to be loved for an afternoon." That's not fair. It's exactly fair. Tyron's voice cracked, the dam finally breaking after years of silence. Do you know what it's like, Byron? Living in your shadow my entire life? I wasn't bold like you. I wasn't loved like you. Not by the people, not even by our own father in the way that mattered to him publicly. I told myself for years I wasn't good enough, not confident enough, not enough of anything because that's what it felt like standing next to you. And then I finally found something that was mine. Someone who looked at me, not you, not the crown, not the name, and saw me. And you walked in and ruined it without even noticing. Byron stood frozen, the careless smile finally, completely gone. Myca isn't some girl I'm infatuated with, Tyron continued, quieter now, the anger giving way to something raw. I love her. I have loved watching her fight for people who had no one else fighting for them. I have loved becoming someone worth her respect. And now she thinks I'm a stranger, because for one afternoon, I let you wear my face. For the first time in either of their lives, Byron had no joke ready, no deflection. He simply sat with the full weight of what his brother had said, and for the first time, he truly saw him not the quiet shadow he'd always assumed needed protecting, but a man who had been carrying far more than Byron had ever bothered to notice. Sit, Byron said softly, and when Tyron didn't move, he reached out and gently guided him down beside him. Our father always called for you, Byron began, his voice unusually subdued. For the important conversations, the real decisions, it was always you he wanted in the room, and I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need it. So I found other ways to be happy, the hunting, the women, the noise of it all, because the alternative was hating you, and I never wanted that. He paused. When you turned down the crown, I took it to prove something. To him, to myself. I thought I could prove I was just as capable. I wasn't. I realized that within the first month, but by then it was easier to let you quietly do the work than admit I'd made a mistake. Byron, I didn't know how much I was hurting you, Byron said, meeting his brother's eyes directly. I swear to you, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Go to her. Tell her everything. Tell her the truth. What if she doesn't love me? Tyron's voice came out smaller than he intended. What if it was never me she fell for? What if it was just the crown, the title, the king she thought I was? Byron actually laughed, soft and sad. Ty, a title is just a word. A leader is what gives that word any weight at all. The man Myca fell for, that's you. I've watched her. She never once looked at me the way she looks at you, even when she thought I was you. There's a difference, and she knows it even if she can't name it yet. He gripped his brother's shoulder. I'm sorry I never took your feelings seriously. That ends tonight. Go be the king you already are. The next council session, Tyron led with the quiet steadiness that had become, without anyone fully realizing it, the true rhythm of the kingdom's recovery. Myca kept her distance, arms folded, watching him with sharp, careful eyes throughout the entire session. The council noticed the shift too, the return of focus, of precision, of a king who listened before speaking. Myca recognized it instantly. This was the man she knew. When the session ended, she gathered her papers and made to leave before he could catch her alone. He stopped her at the door anyway. Myca, please. She turned, jaw set. What do you want? He hesitated only a moment before the truth spilled out of him, all of it. Finally, without filtering or softening. He told her about refusing the crown out of fear, about standing in for Byron during his disappearances, about the night Byron had begged him to take over fully. He told her that the man who'd ignored her petitions for years was his brother, not him, that every unanswered letter, every turned-away audience at the gate, traced back to Byron's negligence and his own silent complicity in covering for it. And then, voice trembling, he told her he loved her, that she had made him better than he'd ever believed he could be. Myca didn't soften. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice was steady, but there was real hurt beneath it. All this time. Why? I never expected it to go this far, Tyron admitted. I thought I'd fill in for a while and go back to being no one. But then, I met you, and the longer it went on, the more terrified I became that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't want anything to do with me. That's not a reason, Myca's voice sharpened. You told me once that compromising me would be an insult to my family's legacy. But not trusting me to handle the truth, that's the real insult, Tyron. You decided for me what I could and couldn't bear. That's exactly the kind of decision my family has spent generations fighting against. She turned and walked away, and this time, he didn't follow. Byron was waiting in his chambers when Tyron returned, the hopeful look on his face fading the instant he saw his brother's expression. She didn't forgive you, he said quietly. Tyron shook his head. Byron rose and pulled him into a firm embrace, the kind of unguarded comfort they hadn't shared since they were boys. It's time, he said. Time to do the right thing. Tyron pulled back, confused. What are you talking about? The truth. All of it. To everyone. Byron's voice was steady, certain in a way Tyron had rarely heard from him. You've led this kingdom for months and made it thrive. They sing my name for what you've done, and that's not right. It never was. It's time they know who actually saved them. I don't want your throne, Byron. It was never mine to begin with. Byron managed a small, genuine smile. It took Myca showing up and turning both our lives upside down for me to finally see that. Let's go fix it, together. The kingdom gathered in the square before the castle, summoned by an announcement that had spread through every street. Within the hour, both princes would address the people together, for the first time in living memory. Byron stood beside Tyron on the raised podium, the crown held loosely in his hands. When the crowd quieted, he spoke every word of it, the truth laid bare without a single excuse to soften it. The years of neglect, the deception, the brother who had carried the weight of an entire kingdom while wearing another man's name. The square erupted. Some shouted for Tyron's punishment, accusing him of impersonating the crown. Others demanded Byron step down entirely, furious at years of abandonment finally given a name. The kingdom needs a king like Tyron. Byron called over the noise, his voice carrying with unusual conviction. The crown was always meant to be his. Whatever punishment is owed, give it to me. I am the reason for all of it. It was Tyron who spoke next, finding Myca's face in the crowd before he found the courage to continue. What my brother and I did was wrong, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. We won't pretend otherwise. We were caught in something neither of us fully understood. A quiet competition neither of us meant to start, and it put this kingdom at risk. But if there is one thing that remained true through all of it, it's the love between us. My brother would move mountains for me. I would do the same for him. If punishment is owed, let us both face it equally. The crowd's anger didn't fade, but it faltered, uncertain. The simple binary of villain and victim no longer quite so simple. Then Myca stepped forward, and the square fell silent around her. It's true they wronged this kingdom, she said, her voice carrying clear and unshaking. But it's also true that they meant well, even when their methods failed. Byron knew he wasn't fit to rule, and asked his brother to take his place rather than let the kingdom suffer further under his neglect. Tyron ruled with more care and dedication than this kingdom has seen in a generation. Look around you at the rebuilt cottages, the restored wells, the council that finally answers to its people. Judge the outcome, even if you cannot forgive the path that led there. The council deliberated as the crowd waited, tension thick in the square, until Myca presented them with record after record, every reform, every repair, every life changed under Tyron's quiet leadership. Reluctantly, finally, the council reached its decision. Tyron was crowned the true Alpha King before the entire gathered kingdom. As the crowd began to disperse, Tyron searched for Myca, hoping for one private moment amid the chaos, but she was already walking away, her back straight, refusing to look behind her. He didn't think. He simply dropped the crown onto the empty chair behind him and ran. Myca! The crowd stilled, turning to watch as their newly crowned king sprinted through the square, calling her name until he finally reached her and dropped to his knees in front of everyone. "I'm sorry," he said, breathless. "I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. I'm sorry I let fear ruin what we built together. I'm sorry I lacked the courage to stand for what I believed in for far too long." He looked up at her, the entire kingdom watching, and didn't care. "Look around you. This kingdom thrives because you fought for it when no one else would. I became someone worth being because you were the first person who ever truly saw me. You built this. You made it happen. I'm not afraid to be myself anymore because you're the one who showed me who that was." Myca knelt and pulled him to his feet, cupping his face in both hands the way she'd once tried to, weeks ago, believing him to be someone else entirely. "I never loved you because you were a king," she said, her voice breaking with emotion she no longer tried to hide. "I loved you because you were a leader who listened. I saw it the day you knelt in the rubble of the lower pack with your own hands. I fell for the man who showed compassion before he ever showed power. I already forgave you, Tyron. I was only waiting for you to ask me properly." Years of carried weight seemed to leave him all at once. He took her hand, and before the entire kingdom, asked if she would be his mate and his queen. "Yes," she said, and the square erupted in cheers as he pulled her into a kiss that held everything neither of them had dared say until now. Byron reached them moments later, breathless from running, and without a word wrapped both arms around the two of them, pulling them into one tight embrace as the kingdom roared its approval around them. Thank you so much for listening. If this story moved you the way it moved me writing it, I'd love to know. Drop your favorite moment in the comments below. See you in the next one.